Hello and welcome to Sticky from the Inside, the employee engagement podcast that looks at how to build stickier, competition-smashing, consistently successful organisations from the inside out. I'm your host, Andy Goram, and I'm on a mission to help more businesses turn the lights on behind the eyes of their employees, light the fires within them, and create tons more success for everyone. This podcast is for all those who believe that's something worth going after and would like a little help and guidance in achieving that. Each episode, we dive into the topics that can help create what I call stickier businesses. The sort of businesses where people thrive and love to work, and where more customers stay with you and recommend you to others because they love what you do and why you do it. So, if you want to take the tricky out of being sticky, listen on. Okay, after a difficult and different year, businesses and their teams are starting to come back together, and re-establishing those team dynamics that make up a company's culture is going to be a commonplace activity for many. Well, today I'm joined by someone who helps businesses just do that. He's even written a book on the topic called The Exceptional Team Blueprint, but typical of the guy I know, he's not here to plug that, but he's just going to share some of his experiences on the practical things that you can do to get the band back together and humming. So let me introduce you to Andrew Deighton. Hi, Andrew. How are you, mate?
Hi, Andy. I'm good, thank you. Yeah.
Welcome to Sticky Studios, my friend.
Thank you.
So, I know you. My viewers really might not know you. So just give us a little bit of an insight into Andrew's world and what you do and where all that's come from.
Yeah, so I'm a people and team development specialist. I really started my career at Rolls-Royce. I did 26 years there, and then took voluntary redundancy and took the opportunity to set up my own business, because I thought if I don't try it, I'll look back and potentially regret it. And really to focus on the bits of the job that I enjoyed doing and not focus on the bits that I didn't enjoy, so I could really focus on those things around, particularly team development. So I work with businesses to put strategy, process, solutions in place around people development in its broadest sense, but particularly I really like the team development side of things. So that's what I focus on primarily in the business now.
Hey, look, if we all got to choose to do the things we just love doing, the world would be a much better place.
Would, absolutely.
So taking full advantage of that situation makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
a lot of sense to me. But yeah. Rolls-Royce, that's one hell of a company. What were you doing inside Rolls-Royce?
I started off in engineering. So my background originally was as a designer, designing jet engine parts. So, and then gradually I moved further away from that and into more training HR type positions. So at various points, I looked after the employee development side of the marine division. I was an HR director for a while, again in a marine services part. And then my last substantive role before I left was running the early career team. So looking after all the graduate and apprentice recruitment and selection, which was a brilliant job because it was just so positive and focused on the future. So that was my main big team leadership position. So I looked after 50 people working for me, and between us, we looked after about 2,000 trainees at any one time across the business, which was just great.
Well, that's one hell of a change, mate, from design engineer to effectively HR practitioner. That's some journey.
Absolutely. And I, when I started at Rolls-Royce in engineering, I thought I'd be in engineering for life, as a lot of people were at Rolls-Royce, 30, 40 years service. I never envisaged it. I think it's all about opportunities, Andy. When something comes along that you may never have thought about, just kind of say yes and see what happens. Because as I shifted out, I knew that I could have gone back into engineering originally. I couldn't do it now at all. But I think it's about just balancing those risks and taking those opportunities.
Hey, when an opportunity presents itself to you, grab it with both hands. Yeah. Absolutely. I'm a big fan of that. Is that where you got this love, passion, call it what you will, for all things people, culture, team development. Was that always there before you made the move, or was it something that grew as you made the move?
I think it's something that grew. Actually, I've never really thought about that, but I think it's something that grew. So I'd been a part of, obviously, as an engineer, you're part of a team. I have to deliver my design in time for it to be made, to be tested, and so on. So that was my first kind of experience of being a team member. And then as I moved into different roles, I worked for some really great team leaders, directors, project managers, whatever you call them. And then also later in my career, sort of moved into leadership positions myself as well. And really what I've done is I've taken those experiences and observations from watching what people do that I think makes a really great team leader, and kind of use those going forward. So it's just gathering those experiences and those observations, as well as a bit of sort of theory, shall we say, as well. But I think what you said at the outset, make things work in practice. That's what matters to me.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine there's probably no finer place to get a good grounding in that stuff in a company like Rolls-Royce, right?
No, it's brilliant. Absolutely, yeah, great place. It was a great place to work.
So if it was something that this love grew whilst you were there, what were the things? Were there some standout moments, and what were the sort of key lessons that you took out of, I guess, teamwork in that organisation that you now help businesses with today?
I think probably my first one was really it was my first HR job, but knowing nothing about HR. So they took a risk on me as an HR team leader for a new factory build, and this factory was greenfield. So we had 2 years to basically build an operating factory from nothing, but it was very different at the time for Rolls-Royce. It was new terms and conditions, new shift patterns, new reward systems. So actually having no HR baggage, because I didn't know anything at the time, was an advantage, because I didn't kind of know what you could and couldn't do. And that was really, I think that was really my first experience of being part of a very, very focused project team with a really clear deliverable. So as I say, we had 2 years to get this factory working. I think that was really the foundation of a lot of the stuff that I've learned over time, watching how the project director ran that team informed a lot of the things that I still do today.
What are those principles then that this project leader, I guess, instilled in you that you try and help businesses with today? Because that sounds like a sort of a framework that you've built on, right?
What he got us all to do was really think, why do I want to be on this team? What kind of what's in it for me being a team member? And so for me at the time, I had 2 young daughters. I had twins, and I was quite early in my career, really. And I just made this shift from engineering into HR training sort of roles. And this was all about progression, to be honest. It was for me, it was all about how can I provide better for my family? So being part of this team, I could see I had a potentially quicker career progression. I was learning new stuff, which I wanted to do as well. So for me, those were the drivers. It was a mix of the opportunity to do something new, and Rolls-Royce hadn't. This was a £40 million investment quite a long time ago, and Rolls-Royce hadn't done anything like this. So it was being part of something quite new and radical, actually, was really interesting for me personally. But as I say, from a career perspective, it felt the right thing to do as well.
So you were committed at this point then, weren't you? I mean, you had a real reason to sort of throw yourself into it.
Yeah. And then when it was at times it was a really difficult project, because we were closing an existing factory and we were recruiting specifically into the new factory. So there were some at times some quite difficult issues to deal with, and quite a lot of bad feeling at times from, obviously, I understand, from the affected population. So when we had these downtimes, these really sort of low points, having that really personal reason for why I want to be part of this, it just helps you focus again and gives you that kick to really to get on with it. So I think it's really important, if you can, really understand what's your real driver for wanting to be part of this team.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what we do is about making a personal connection, right? And this is no different. I mean, if we think about what's going on, I guess in businesses all over the country, well, all over the world at the moment, is people are slowly coming back. Right, businesses are opening up. People are coming back to offices, places of work, albeit maybe in some sort of part-time or hybrid type working.
Yep.
And you're going to be bringing people back together who, all right, maybe via Zoom or whatever, have been together, but have been experiencing the last year very, very differently. So when you're thinking about building teams and, well, even rebuilding teams and rebuilding cultures based on the last year, this must be where your framework, your approach to teamwork, team building, culture definition must really come into its own right now. So
yeah, I think for a lot of organisations, obviously those who've had people out, as you say, on furlough, so that maybe the more office based who can work remotely or have had to furlough people. I think actually when they start to bring people back together, it is kind of like forming a new team, really starting from scratch in some instances. If people haven't had any connection for months or potentially up to a year, it is really like starting again and building a team from nothing potentially.
So if you're looking at that and you're coming into a business, what are those steps then, Andrew? What are the steps that you work to establish or rebuild a team and set that up for success going forwards? Is there a sort of, have you got a process that you take businesses through? And what's that look like?
Yeah, I've got a bit of a process that I use for these sort of restarting sessions, really. So I think the first thing is it's really reconnecting people. So there's kind of almost a bit of ice breaking, a bit of energizing again, and as you would do with these sort of icebreaker activities, and just getting people kind of to socialize again potentially, because they may not have had that informal social contact that you get when you're working as part of a team as well. So it's kind of restarting those relationships first of all. So forget the work side of things, just get people talking together again, and just lots of different things you can do, but if you can link it going forwards to the business, people may well have picked up a lot of new skills whilst they've been working from home or not had other things to do. They've maybe tried new things, and those skills could be things that could actually help the business. So getting people just to say, what have you learned whilst we've been locked down? Something new that you've done, things like that. So just general ice-breaking type activities.
It's interesting that you say
people reconnect.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I think I saw a video or read something recently, was some expert, and I use the term in inverted commas, was saying, yep, for the first few weeks back at work, there really shouldn't be any work. It should all be about, getting back, getting to know each other, spending time. Now, look, I mean, I think that's interesting. I'm not quite sure how practical that is for businesses to do. Yeah. Oh, we won't do any work for 2 weeks. We'll just all get together and love one another. I mean, that's lovely, but I don't think it's practical. But I think the point that is valid, and I guess plays to what you've just sort of said, is that re-establishing connection with each other, or establishing a connection with each other, is really going to be a useful platform to build on. The stuff that people have been dealing with over the last year, there's plenty of opportunities for things to talk about and ways to connect.
Yeah, and I ran a team session last week actually, and there were a couple of people on the call who joined that team but had never met their colleagues. So they joined the team sort of during lockdown from an external organisation, and just had never met either virtually or physically any of their colleagues. So there's obviously a bit of time on that call was kind of them introducing themselves as well, which was
so that's step one.
I think
So that's step one, right? So we've got
Yeah,
re-engage, I guess. Is that what you call it? Or?
it is. Yeah, re-engage, reconnect, re-energize, get them working back together. And I think all these steps that I take people through, you could do them in a half day type session, but your point about actually having to do some work as well, we are here to run a business and do some work on the business. I think you could spread these over a number of weeks, just pick up one of the steps per week and work on it. You don't need to do it all in one go. You can do some work as well, I think, at the same time as these things.
Yeah, like a sort of phased approach to it all.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So what's next?
So I think the next stage that I think is really, really important to think about is the experiences that people have gone through. So people will have gone through all sorts of, and potentially quite, very, very difficult experiences. They may have lost people. They've had maybe the caring responsibilities, the homeschooling type responsibilities. People will have had a massive range of different experiences. And I think it's important where people want to, I don't think you should force people to do this, but if they want to share those experiences so people understand what they've been through and where they're coming from, then I think it's important to give people an opportunity to do that. So I call this the sort of the review and the reflect step. So it's that recognition and acknowledgement for you as the team leader as well as the team members. I think that's important for a bit of almost self awareness, just to think about what they've been through, how people are feeling about returning to work. You may well have people who've worked all the way through and their colleagues have been on furlough for 12 months. So there's potentially almost a bit of I've been here and, you've been sat at home potentially is the perception, so I think the opportunity to raise those sort of concerns that people have got, or, a lot of people might be a bit nervous about going back into, if they're going physically in, from a COVID perspective, a health and safety type perspective, people might be a bit fearful of that. So having that opportunity to raise concerns, but then about, okay, what are you looking forward to as well? Sort of shift it from maybe the more negative side to the positive things. And what have people learned from the experience that actually, they reckon we're something like 5 years ahead, digital working wise than we would have been had this not happened. So a lot of organizations have found some really great ways of working differently. So use those, take them forward, so look back and say, what have we learned as an individual and also as a business and teams and so on, and what do we want to build on? So you're sort of moving from that historical experience to the present now.
No, I think that's a really, really good point. This thing about, I guess, people's different experiences, and yeah, you can look at the furlough and non-furloughed. I know from a lot of the work that I've done, in the early days, there was an awful lot of focus on the people who were not in the workplace or the offices, and where's everybody okay? Where's everybody set up? Almost to the, I guess, detriment of the guys who were still in the business. And I know from survey work that I've done with some clients that group felt almost forgotten and left behind. And if we're honest, a bit resentful. And I think you can hear and read about similar things on the whole furlough thing. The guys who've been working, I guess, in the business hard, covering the gaps of the many people who unfortunately had to be furloughed, but who may be feeling a little, mixed about the whole thing. Yes, they were employed fully, working, great, all that kind of stuff, but probably quite isolated themselves from other teammates, may even felt like put upon, where and over the fence that they can't really see, people are sitting back, chilling, shaving their own heads and, doing things in the back garden and repairing things in the house that they should have done for 10 years. And that whole, I guess, furlough envy, if that's what it's called, I mean, that's going to be quite a gnarly topic for some people to kind of get into. But your point is, you've got to get into it, right? You've got to get it out in the open.
I think so. I think that's important. And so those people they'll have still had the same things going on at home, but they've not been there to maybe deal with them or help out and so on. So yeah, I think you're right. That will. Plus, there may well have had to be redundancies and things, so that team may have lost a few team members for business reasons. But and so again, there might be a bit of this kind of guilt survivor syndrome as well.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of stuff that's mixed together here.
Absolutely. And the subsequent steps then that you would take in this journey.
Yeah. So what I do then is once they've thought about the experience and what actually the positive things that they can take forward in terms of how they work and processes and all sorts of things like that, is really to get them to refocus on has the strategy changed? So the business might have shifted its offerings, or it might have shifted how it delivers its offerings, and has that strategy changed? And then what does that mean then to us as a team? So you're kind of moving from the present to a bit of the future now, and getting people to really refocus on and re-engage on what our deliverables are, what our challenges are, and bring in a bit of the thing we were talking about earlier. What does it mean to me to be part of this team? How does it benefit me at a personal level, at a career level, and so on, in this new world potentially, and start to think about what do we want to be different in the team now as we move forward, and what has to be, what needs to be different. So you're kind of getting people now to start to refocus on the future.
Well, I think to your point earlier, right, that this whole thing about putting people in the center of it, I mean, that is a critical part of engagement. If you can't see yourself in it, then it's never going to engage you or change anything. And then this thing about having a clear idea about what the future looks like, again, that strategic narrative for the business is incredibly important. And again, another major part of forging a strong, engaged culture, people knowing where we're going.
It's about that purpose.
Absolutely about that purpose. And as you've said right at the start, with your own personal journey, this is an opportunity for businesses right now to potentially change or renovate some of the things that were happening pre-COVID that, on reflection, maybe could be improved, or maybe the last year has shown us opportunities to kind of say, well, actually, we've worked in a different way now, or we're looking at different things. Let's up the ante. Let's make some of these changes. Often people would love the world to stop, and so they could get off and change a few things, but you never get given that opportunity. And yet, in a positive sense, we have just been presented with that opportunity. And so I think your framework's a great way for businesses to be able to sort of take that opportunity to improve going forwards, and involvement with their people and having a clear sense of going forward is really important to that, right?
It is. Yeah. That word involvement, absolutely. Get people involved and engaged in it.
So we've got our team kind of coming back together. We've got a sort of a framework to bring those teams in. But I guess your work takes on a wider view of culture as well. What are the sort of key lessons? I mean, again, we can use the backdrop of the things that we're dealing with today, in that, for you, how does one go about trying to put together a solid core culture that really works for the business?
It comes down to ultimately to how people behave. That's what sets the culture, I think, fundamentally. And if you work backwards from that, so you've got your, as we talked about a few minutes ago, you've got your purpose, or you've got your vision as to where you need the organization or the team to go. And then from that, you set your values. And so those could be corporate values, or I think you can have your own set of team values as well. Now, obviously, they shouldn't contradict, but the corporate values. But I think it's quite important to have a set of team level values. This is how we are going to work together, and then take that down to the behaviors level. And so for each of those values that you define, so if I walked into your team, how would I know you were operating to those values? What would I see? What would I hear? And get the team members themselves to define those behaviors so they can almost ultimately become almost self-policing, so they can start to, in a friendly and informal way, you often see them, they'll pull each other up on, you're not demonstrating that value, you're not doing this because of your behavior. And it starts to become, I guess, kind of an embedded, just the way of doing stuff.
Like breathing, right?
So having those, yeah. So having those set of almost behavioural statements, what will we see for each value? Not masses, just 2 or 3 for each one. And then people have got something to, they kind of know the expectations around the behaviours, and that sets the culture then. So culture is ultimately just how people behave, how people do things.
So right now you're saying this is an opportunity for businesses to, even if they've got a set of values, is to reassess where they are. And in doing so, involve their team members in putting those together. From my perspective, when I think about that stuff, I mean, that involvement is crucial for buy-in, but it's also crucial to transfer ownership for these things, because I think where we probably both see issues with values in businesses in the past is when there is no ownership, because they've almost been passed down,
yeah, absolutely.
And you don't want that, right? You want these things to be built from the bottom up, really. It's interesting you say about having team values as well as corporate values, because I have a similar but different sort of perspective, in that I think you have the core values of the business that remain the same, but the behaviors that, if you like, the observable behaviors that show, like you're talking about, the delivery of those values. Yeah, I'm a firm believer that should be grown from the team, right? So it's really relevant and really owned.
Yeah, so I think it just an example to build on that point, Andy. I think it depends on the size of your organisation as well. But one method that I think that works really well is you can kind of get a diagonal slice of the population into a focus group type of environment, and so you've got some senior managers, you've got some middle managers, you've got some team members, but get that slice of mix of people into a room and take the values, whether they're corporate, the corporate ones that you want to roll out, and get that group working together. So they all bring a different perspective based on their role and their experience, but they can build it up together. And then it's not top down implemented. It's built by the population themselves, kind of thing. So you get that engagement and ownership. It's about ownership ultimately, but I think people can hear the different perspectives to help them create that set of behaviours. So, just a sort of a real example, I did some work a while ago with a brick manufacturer, and they've got about 16 sites across the country. Mm-hmm. So they got their corporate values, but they were, at the time, they were a bit sort of just wallpaper. So what I did as part of a team of people working with the company was, actually, does it matter if the behaviours that we see in Bolton are different to the behaviours we see in Leicester, because the culture of that factory is different. But the underpinning thing that you said earlier is that common set of values. So we took each of those corporate values, and the team developed their local set in language that was relevant to that location, to the sort of work they were doing. So you had that common set of corporate values, but different sort of definitions depending on the location and the culture of the local site. And then people feel it's real. Then it's not just corporate words. Actually, we built those words, and the words we've used mean something to us.
But they're still delivering the overarching, I guess,
it's values
of the business.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's consistent with the direction and that the business wants to go, and the values the business wants, which is critical. Absolutely. But people feel it's real then. It's practical to them.
I mean, it can go the other way as well, can't it? I mean, you talk about, different cultures in different places. Have you come across situations where businesses are trying to merge sites or even different businesses. So you've got two different cultures coming together. Have you had experience of dealing with that? And if so, what were you faced with? But what was, because that almost sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. You know, when I talk to investment guys who talk about, you know, all the DD they do, the due diligence that they do for putting business together on finance and legal and all this kind of stuff. There's a real mix of them who actually do cultural assessments as well, because whilst it will add up the numbers on paper, actually bringing two quite disparate cultures often together could be disastrous, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So what's the solutions for avoiding that sort of stuff?
I think the first question to me is do we need to force that culture on the, if it's an acquisition or a merger or whatever, do we need to force a dominant culture on everybody? I think that should be a question, and the answer may be yes, we do, or it might be actually within a broad set of values. That's okay, you know, and then you can define your, as we've just talked about, you can define your own behaviours under those values, but we're not going to impose a set of behaviours on you. And I think I've got just a couple of brief examples. The first one is quite a few years ago, Rolls-Royce acquired Vickers, and the Vickers acquisition was made up of a lot of small businesses, a lot of them in the sort of the Nordic region, Norway, Finland, Sweden. Lots of them were almost based on an island. You know, it was a factory on an island, and most of the population worked in that factory. And so they had their very own unique cultures, quite different in different parts of the marine business. And Rolls-Royce was trying to put in place its corporate processes and ways of doing things. And at the time, there was quite a lot of pushback. Well, you know, we've been successful in our organization for years, and then this big corporate entity is coming in and forcing us to change potentially. And so I think there was quite a bit of pushback at times from, why should we do it that way? Because actually what we do works really well. We're very nimble, and you're putting bureaucracy in for us, you know. So I think you need to be very careful about how you approach those sort of things and the engagement and things like that. And you might have genuine reasons why it must be done this way, and that's fine. But go through that thought process and then get the engagement with the people to think about, okay, well, we've got to do this. How are we going to do it? How are we going to implement it in our context? The other one that springs to mind is my last job before I left Rolls-Royce was on a bid team. We were bidding for a very large civil nuclear decommissioning contract, and it was Rolls-Royce was in a joint venture with two other engineering consultancies, AMEC and Atkins. And when I joined that team, we were based in Warrington for various reasons. And when I went into that office, I didn't know any of the Rolls-Royce people, because we'd come from lots of different bits of the business. And I certainly didn't know any of the AMEC or Atkins people. But walking in, you couldn't tell who was from which business. There was this culture that had been developed within the project team, within the bid team, which was just brilliant. And I asked the guy who led that team how he did it. His answer was, I assume that the people that the companies are putting forward to be in this team are capable and good at their job. I take that for granted. So I'm not second guessing the people they're putting forward from a technical or functional expertise perspective.
Yeah.
And then what I do is I recruit on people who I think will fit into the team from a behavioural perspective. And it just worked. So this guy was a Welsh guy, and he was big into his rugby, and he kind of used his rugby experience to just create this. Absolutely, and it was the most seamless team I've ever worked for. It was just brilliant. We all had a very clear focus, what we had to do, really tight timescales. We actually, basically, during the week, we kind of lived together, really, because we all lived in the same hotel for 6 months, actually, Monday to Friday. So there was this real strong bond of team members. But he just based it on the fit into the team, and it just worked. It was brilliant.
I think a lot of it comes from that leadership and setting that clear vision, and I guess holding people to account on their behavior in line with that vision. Well, I think we have already talked about a whole wide range of things in this conversation. So we've talked about, you know, the steps of pulling a team together or re-engaging a team who've been apart for the last year. We've talked about the influence all that has on culture and some steps you might need to take on that. But we talked about practicality at the start of this. And what could be more practical, Andrew, than sticking your thoughts onto 3 sticky notes for me? Because this is the part of my show where we just try and summarize and give the listeners something simple and practical to take away. So in the context that we've talked about with people coming back to work and teams coming back together and opportunities to kind of either reestablish the culture of the business or establish the new culture that businesses want to see going forward, what wisdom would you stick onto 3 sticky notes that adorn the walls of Sticky Studios?
Yeah, I think my first one would be, and again, these apply to startups or existing teams. So I think my first one would be to really define that set of behaviors that are relevant to your team in its specific context, but link it back to whatever. If it has to be linked back to the company values, fine. But define that specific set of behaviors and in a language that's relevant to the people in that team. So someone once called it chip shop language. So it's not all jargon and so on. It's real language that people understand. So that would be my first one. I think my second one is around that engagement side, getting people engaged by helping them to think of what's in it for me. So beyond the deliverables of the project or the task or the activities, why do I really personally want to be part of this team? And then my third one is more around the leader of the team. So there's this concept called the shadow of the leader. And I think as the team leader, you've got to live up to those values and demonstrate those behaviors in everything you do, because all those team members are going to be looking up and saying, well, if you don't do it, why should I bother? I think that's really important, that it all starts at the top, at the leader level, because if you don't do it, no one else will do it.
Absolutely right, mate. No say-do gap on my watch. I get that 100%. Absolutely right. That's great. That's some very nice, simple, practical examples of things to do to help you re-engage with your team and start rebuilding that culture after what's been an interesting year.
Yeah.
Andrew, thank you so much for your time, my friend. Really enjoyed speaking to you, and I will see you again very soon. Take care.
Thanks, Andy.
Okay, that was Andrew Deighton from AWD Development Solutions. If you'd like to find out a bit more about Andrew, or indeed check out his book, The Exceptional Team Blueprint, where he covers a lot of the things that he's talked about today, please check out the show notes. So, that concludes today's episode. I hope you've enjoyed it, found it interesting, and heard something maybe that will help you become a stickier, more successful business from the inside going forward. If you have, please like, comment and subscribe. It really helps. I'm Andy Goram, and you've been listening to the Sticky from the Inside podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening.